have people in this chamber that are actually causing just as much a threat, if not more of a threat, to our own country. We should be talking about holding our very own accountable for the misinformation and disinformation that they are spreading, whether it's coming out of China, whether it's coming out of Russia, or whoever is peddling it. It is a problem because right now what we see is that people are dying and we cannot get the support that we need from the public because they continue to peddle lies.
During a recent House committee meeting focused on the Chinese Communist Party's political warfare, Representative James Comer expressed grave concerns over the social media platform TikTok. He described TikTok as digital fentanyl, highlighting its addictive nature and potential threats to national security. Comer said that the platform, owned by the Chinese company ByteDance, could be used for espionage and influence operations, posing significant risks to American users and the broader society. The committee discussed the various tactics employed by the Chinese Communist Party, including disinformation campaigns and cyber warfare, underscoring the urgency of addressing these threats to safeguard national interests. Here's what he had to say.
What is the CCP? It is the ruling authoritarian regime of China. While it is enslaving its own people in forced labor camps in China, it is also brazenly engaging in dozens of forms of warfare against America. Each warfare tactic seeks the destruction of our country. Chief among the party's tactics is political warfare. Political warfare is meant to influence the emotions, motives, and behavior of Americans in a manner favorable to China's objectives. By getting Americans dependent on cheap and sometimes dangerous goods made in China, digital fentanyl like TikTok, and actual fentanyl, the CCP is determined to achieve its goal of defeating America on the global stage.
Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez asked Dr. Snyder about the connections between the conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza. She inquired where he saw the entanglement between these two situations and how the U.S. relates to them differently.
What you assessed as a mistake in tying Ukraine to the conflict in Gaza, and also presently, as you mentioned, the necessity of passing aid to Ukraine as quickly as possible. Could you speak a little bit, expand a little bit more on where you see that entanglement or detriment in tying the conflict in Ukraine with what is happening in Gaza and with the Netanyahu's government's decisions to advance in Gaza, and how the U.S. relates to both of those things differently?
Happy to do my best. With respect to the general premise, I just want to emphasize the general premise of your question. These things are all connected. If you're a Chinese political warrior and you're concerned with public opinion, law, and psychology, you're not going to respect the safe spaces of the country that you're trying to weaken. So we might say, I don't want to talk about Ukraine and Chinese political warfare at the same time, but there are no Chinese political warriors who are doing that.
Correct.
We might say, we don't want to talk about Trump because that's too sensitive, but you can precisely not expect Chinese political warriors to respect your safe spaces. It's precisely your safe spaces, your tender spots, that they're going to go after. And this is not just a speculation by me, it's the actual record of what actual Chinese propaganda does. It goes after the safe spaces that you want yourself not to talk about. On the issue of Gaza and Ukraine, I'll be as specific as I can. As I read it in late 2023, in a different political context than the one we're in now, and in a different stage of the war in Gaza than the one we're in now, the Biden administration made a political calculation that bringing Israel and Ukraine together would be the most likely way to get people from both sides of the aisle to vote for a substantial bill. I believe that was the reason at the time. I was not party to those considerations. However, months later, with two other things having happened, the first being that the war in Israel has gone through several stages in the meantime and are having gotten past any place where the Israeli military response is going to lead to a political solution. And secondly, the extreme difficulty in getting Ukraine aid to pass in any form. Those two things change the overall political situation. For me, who's not in the legislature and not in the executive branch, what I see is the qualitative difference between the two events. That Russia invading Ukraine objectively aids the Chinese position in profound ways, which their political warriors try to exploit, but it also threatens world order in ways that are essential to the United States and to its European partners. Whereas the conflict in Gaza is a horrifying terrorist operation, which must lead to some kind of political solution. It won't be solved militarily.
Representatives Jamie Raskin and James Comer engaged in a heated debate over allegations of bribery involving former President Donald Trump. Comer attempted to defend Trump, refusing to acknowledge the evidence presented. This led to a sharp exchange, with Raskin suggesting that if Comer truly believed in Trump's innocence, he should either pursue impeachment proceedings or seek therapy to address his denial of the facts. The intense confrontation underscored the deep divisions and contentious atmosphere within the committee regarding the handling of accusations against the former president.
Professor Snyder, what role does political and financial corruption play in the authoritarian regimes like China and Russia?
It always plays a very fundamental role, as we discussed before, in recruitment, but it also plays an ideological role. Since the basic argument is that democracies are just hypocrisy, everyone is basically corrupt, only money matters. Corruption is used not just as a way to bring in individuals, but it's also used as a way to discredit the entire system.
I wonder if you can help us figure out where we've come as a committee, Professor Snyder. About a year ago, our GOP colleagues began heralding an FBI form, FD 1023, that recorded allegations that President Biden acted corruptly in Ukraine and tried to promote these as credible allegations. It turned out that these were lies, and the person who was promoting them has been indicted for lying to the FBI and constructing a false record. It turns out that he was up to his neck in connections to Russian foreign agents, and yet our colleagues at various points called this a smoking gun, said it showed proof that the Bidens took bribes, and so on. Chairman Jason Smith, for example, said this was a smoking gun, and it was the definitive proof that the Bidens took bribes. It's obviously been dropped, and yet this was the genesis of our investigation. How do we understand?
That's just simply not true, but go ahead.
I'll yield to the chairman if you want to take some more time.
No.
Well, you can use
Are
your
you
time.
saying the bank statements are Russian disinformation, that the Bidens took $9,000 from China?
I agree you've been talking about
Tony
bank
Bobulinski
statements for
said
more
it
than a
was
year, but they don't show anything other than there was no crime.
So
Well,
it's
what do your bank
okay. It's
statements
okay
show?
for, as Tony Bobulinski said, for China to bribe Joe Biden's family with $9 million.
But that's the lie that's been discredited. I mean, where is your impeachment investigation? If Joe Biden took a $9 million bribe from China, why aren't you impeaching him for that?
Well, who says we're not?
Well, I can invite Mr. Moskowitz to come back in. Do you want to move for impeachment today? Because I thought that was your main agenda item. You said it was the paramount priority of the committee.
No, this is a hearing on China, and you all have an obsession with Russia and Trump. It's disturbing.
We can talk
you
about
need
China
therapy.
and Trump or Russia
you all
and Trump.
Need, you need therapy, Mr. Raskin.
No. You need therapy. You're the one who's involved with the deranged politician, not me, okay? I've divorced myself from Donald Trump a long time ago. You're the one who needs to disentangle from that situation. And I will tell you this. If you believe that it would have been illegal for Joe Biden to take $5 million from Ukraine, it certainly would have been. What do you think about Donald Trump taking more than $5 million from the Chinese government while he was president?
Well, we know that Donald Trump had a legitimate business that he talked about and he campaigned on.
The legitimate business was the White House.
What business?
He sold the White House.
Oh, give me a break.
He was
what business was what business were the Bidens in? Well, what business did Joe Biden's family own? What business were they in? Did they have hotels? Did they have a social media company? Did they have golf courses? Did they have casinos? Did they have office buildings?
Mr. Chairman.
What business? Did they have an energy
Mr.
company?
Chairman, we've spent tens of millions of dollars pursuing
Joe
Biden, and you have not identified a single crime.
You are
Really?
lying. That
Really?
is a lie. We have not spent $10 million.
Hey, how much have you spent?
We haven't spent hardly anything.
Oh, it's been for free. Okay. All right. Well, in any event, you know what? Then we get what we paid for it because you got nothing. You got nothing on Joe Biden.
No. Answer
You've
this
not
question.
named a single
Answer this
crime.
question.
No,
what did the Bidens do? What business were they in? Why did they get
can I
millions
answer that?
and millions of dollars?
Well, no, I would like
Can
to
I
ask you a
answer what
question.
they
No,
did?
you start. What did the Bidens do?
I don't know
What
who you're
business
talking
were they
about.
in?
Well, what business is the Comers in? You're talking about lots of people. There's lots of people in the family.
I'm a farmer.
Your
I have
impeachment-
land. I
Your
lease land.
impeachment
I sell honey.
investigation must identify
What did
a
the
high crime
Bidens
and
do?
misdemeanor.
What did they do?
I'll
for
tell
the
you what Joe
millions of
Biden
dollars?
did. He was a senator of the United States. Then he wrote a book, and he said he made the most money he ever made in his life, millions of dollars on his book, and he gave $1 million
That's
away
what
to
his
charity.
family did. That's why Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Romania, China, Russia, that's why they paid the Biden family money, because of Joe Biden.
None of those governments paid anyone any money.
Somebody needs therapy here, but it's nobody on our side of the aisle, okay?
All right,
Because
enough.
no,
Back to the
honestly,
China hearing. Back to the China
you
hearing.
had your chance.
Order.
I would
order.
like my time restored.
No, your time was
I would like
expired.
you-
I've
no,
given
you
3
interrupted
extra
me.
minutes.
I want my time
you
restored.
had your time. You went above, and I let Miss Thornton go a minute.
You know what?
Here, sit down, everybody. Come back. This is about China. We asked a simple question. No, Miss Presley, you're out of order. Sit down.
Mr.
You're
Chairman,
out of order.
Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
can I make a motion that we take a break for 5 minutes?
We're going to keep going. We'll let the record show that Mr. Raskins could not answer the question. What
First of
did
all,
the Bidens do to receive the money?
Let me start with this. My last name is Raskin, okay? We've sat next to each other for more than a year. You don't have to add the S. Number 2, I would like my time restored. And number 3,
No, you had
have
your
not
time. You're
identified
out
a
of
single
order.
crime.
No.
Well, what is the crime that you want to impeach Joe Biden for and keep this nonsense going?
Well,
Why? What is the crime? Tell America right now. You can have the rest of
you're
my
about
time.
to find out.
What
very
is the
soon.
crime?
You're about to find out
Name
very
it.
soon. Chair
We
now
inhabit
recognizes
a
Mr.
propaganda
Biggs from
experiment.
Arizona.
Representative Dan Goldman swiftly addressed Representative James Comer's questions about the Biden family's business activities. Without hesitation, Goldman clarified that the Biden's business endeavors are legitimate and have been scrutinized without any evidence of wrongdoing. He said that the inquiries and allegations from Comer are politically motivated, aiming to divert attention from more pressing national issues. Goldman's prompt and assertive response highlighted his stance on maintaining focus on substantive legislative matters rather than partisan distractions.
I'm going to take a minute just to answer the question you keep asking, which is, what is the business of the Bidens? Not surprisingly, you consistently and continually refer to the Bidens, the Biden family, and you never refer to the individual names. So let me just help you out with telling you what the professions are of the Bidens. Hunter Biden was a corporate governance lawyer appointed by George Bush to the Amtrak board and then served on a number of corporate boards and investment firms. Jim Biden, you can put that down for a second. Jim Biden is a businessman. Joe Biden is the president of the United States and has been a public servant and elected official for the better part of 50 years. Now, Hunter Biden, you may want to discuss what his business was and whether he was equipped to be part of an investment firm to provide services based on his experience, but that has nothing to do with your jurisdiction or the impeachment investigation, because you cannot link any of his business dealings, A, to any foreign government, which he was never paid by, unlike Donald Trump's and Donald Trump's family, or B, to the President of the United States. And that's why your impeachment investigation is a spectacular failure.
Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene stated that she does not support white supremacy or Nazis. She firmly rejected any associations or endorsements of such ideologies, stressing her stance against hate and extremism.
I think this is a very important hearing we're having today, and I'd like to take a little time to respond to some misinformation that has been spread here. Mr. Snyder, you said in your opening statement that the fact that there are neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian military is disinformation, a disinformation trope, and a Russian denazification meme. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record this 2021 Time magazine article titled How a White Supremacist Militia Uses Facebook to Radicalize and Train New Members about the Ukrainian neo-Nazi Azov Battalion.
Without objections ordered.
Thank you. Time also put together a piece only 3 years ago, and it's quite an extensive video that gives full information about the Nazis in Ukraine and their recruitment efforts that go all around the world. It's amazing to me that just in a few years' time, it's now considered misinformation to talk about the Nazis in Ukraine. I'd like to quote the article. It says that Ali Soufan, a security consultant and former FBI agent who has studied Azov Nazis, estimates that more than 17,000 foreign fighters have come to Ukraine over the past 6 years from 50 countries. According to Christopher Wray, the FBI director, he said that Azov has been recruiting and radicalizing and training American citizens for years. He also finished saying in his testimony to the U.S. Senate that American white supremacists are actually traveling overseas to train. This is an extremely concerning situation. I don't think anyone in the United States government, Americans, do not support actual Nazis or white supremacists. I know I certainly do not. And I can't understand why in just a short amount of time, this information that our own American media frequently talked about is no longer talked about. I'd like to point out also, here's an NBC article stating that Ukraine's Nazi problem is real. Mr. Snyder, do you see this headline? This is NBC News. They say that Ukraine's Nazi problem is real, even if Putin's denazification claim is not. So even our own American media, unless you consider NBC or Time Magazine misinformation spreaders or disinformation media outlets, this is contrary to what you testified. And there's frequent pictures all over, anybody can find them, of Nazis. Here they are. This looks like something you'd see out of Hitler's Germany from Ukraine. And this is something that's extremely important to talk about. According to the Council of Europe, however, Ukraine is ranked well in the top half of countries in terms of how corrupt they are. In the last 5 years, Ukraine is ranked close to the countries like Gambia, Iran, Myanmar, and Sierra Leone in corruption. That's not very free and democratic company to keep. Ukraine has canceled their elections, arrested members of the press, not allowed different types of religion unless it goes along with the Ukrainian government. And right now, the biggest push in Washington, D.C. is to fund the Ukraine war with another $60 billion. And while we're talking about the CCP, I think it's extremely important to point out that our own wide open border is the most dangerous threat to our national security. According to CBP data, there have been 24,296 Chinese nationals enter the United States at the southern border just this year in 2024. I want you to know that's up 7,000% since Biden took office in 2021, when only 342 Chinese nationals crossed our border.
Representative Maxwell Frost called out Marjorie Taylor Greene on her claims of not supporting white supremacy. Frost presented supporting evidence to challenge her statements, highlighting instances where Greene had made remarks or taken actions that aligned with white supremacist views. He argued that her denials were inconsistent with her past behavior, underscoring the need for accountability and truthfulness in addressing issues of hate and extremism.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get into it, it's interesting to hear my colleague just now talk about disavowing white supremacists when in 2022, she spoke at an event led by white supremacists and white nationalist Nick Fuentes, and when asked about it, doubled down on it and said, we're going to focus on people, not labels. So get out of here with that damn hypocrisy. And Dr. Snyder, I'm going to give you some time to respond. Go ahead.
First of all, I'd like to thank the representative from Georgia by making clear with her comments and with her person that any discussion of political warfare has to include Russia, Ukraine, and America. She's just demonstrated that point, I think, very powerfully. On the question of Nazis, I've written 2 books as a historian about Nazis and the Holocaust. On the question of Ukrainian nationalism, I am the leading scholar of that subject in North America and have been writing about it for 20 years. If the chamber is interested in the degree of far-right participation in Ukrainian politics, you can be assured that no far-right party has ever crossed 3% in a Ukrainian election. So of course there are bad people in every country, but by any comparative standard is a very small phenomenon. In Russia, on the other hand, the army includes openly Nazi formations, such as Rushich. The government itself is fascist in character, and it is carrying out a war which includes deportation of children by the tens of thousands, the open intention of destroying a state, as well as mass torture.
Representative Jasmine Crockett addressed the issue of propaganda, highlighting the concerning spread of misinformation. She pointedly criticized Marjorie Taylor Greene, showing how she's actively contributing to the problem by tweeting false information. Crockett noted that such actions undermine public trust and fuel divisiveness, making it harder to address real issues effectively. She called for greater accountability from public figures, stressing the responsibility they have in ensuring the accuracy of their statements and the information they share with the public. Crockett's remarks underscored the urgent need to combat misinformation and promote truthfulness in political discourse.
Dr. Snyder, when you were testifying earlier, you were actually responding to questions that were posed by another colleague from Texas. One of the questions was, who was the president in 2008? And to be clear, Obama ran in 2008, but Obama did not swear in until 2009. So when my colleague asked about invasions from Russia, actually in 2008, Russia was invading Georgia, and it was another Texan that was the president at the time, and that was George Bush. In addition to that, one of the things that my colleague did not inquire about, but I want to make sure we're clear about, is that Trump was president in 2019 when he threatened to withhold aid to the Ukrainians as they were being threatened by the Russians. So I do want to make sure that we do that. You know, what is wild to me is that this word patriot seems to be getting co-opted for propagandists, because that's what they do. All right, so we're going to talk about what my colleague from Georgia, she talked about misinformation, and I don't know what she was talking about, but nevertheless, we can look at her own tweets and we can find plenty of misinformation, but we're just going to go through one specific tweet. Now, she said that we need to work with Israel to track down the serial numbers on any U.S. weapons used by Hamas against Israel. Dr. Snyder, I may be going out on a limb, but are you aware that that was actually just propaganda that was put out and there actually were not U.S. weapons that were being used by Hamas, as she attempted to insinuate in this tweet?
I mean, we first of all, I appreciate the clarification. I knew that the question, who were the American presidents, was going to be the toughest one I got from that side. So I appreciate your helping me out. Yes, I mean, obviously there what you have is a typical example of American-Russian messaging where the implicit idea is supposed to be we shouldn't give weapons to Ukraine because they're going to end up going somewhere else. There's no evidence for that. It's hard to think of an example where American weapons have been leveraged with such success as on the Ukrainian battlefield.
Thank you so much. In fact, for some people, especially people that serve on the committee, they may be surprised to know that it's actually a former Russian president and Putin's sidekick, Dmitry, and I don't want to slaughter his name, so I'm going to say Dmitry M., who actually she quote tweeted. See, the problem that we're having, and the reason that we're bringing up Russia as well, is because Russia is a threat as well as China. So we are not going to sit here and pretend as if it's only one or the other. But the biggest problem that we have is we have people that sit in this chamber and they spread the misinformation. If it was left in Russia or China, whatever. But the problem is that you have people that sit in positions of power and they they have a $2 million budget. You think that they would call on some staff to find out if they were telling the truth about the things that they're putting on social media, but instead it works for their rhetoric. And as we talk about rhetoric, something else that was appalling to me was this insinuation that when you look at the Ukrainians, which is why we're having problems getting the funding that Ukraine needs, is because people in this chamber push misinformation and disinformation. They want to talk about the Ukrainians got all of these Nazis. Well, let me tell you something. You can find Nazis anywhere. You can find them right here in the United States. In fact, a bunch of the people that they're calling victims and prisoners of war, also known as convicted felons from January 6th, I have an article that I'd like to enter into the record by unanimous consent that says neo-Nazi January 6th rioter pleads guilty.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. So here's the point. We have people in this chamber that are actually causing just as much a threat, if not more of a threat, to our own country. We should be talking about holding our very own accountable for the misinformation and disinformation that they are spreading, whether it's coming out of China, whether it's coming out of Russia, or whoever is peddling it. It is a problem because right now what we see is that people are dying and we cannot get the support that we need from the public because they continue to peddle lies. And I'm tired of it because I didn't come to this chamber to play games. I came to this chamber to answer to the people, the American people, and to make sure that we keep the American people safe. And if we don't get something done, as they talk about the border, I do want to be clear, the only reason we haven't gotten funding for the border is because they killed, the House Republicans here, killed the bill that they actually sent us from the Senate side. If they want to do some work, let me tell you something, the Democrats are ready, and it seems like the Senate Republicans are ready too. They just need to get to it and stop peddling Putin's lies. Thank you, and I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today as we address the greatest threat to America's national security, the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP will stop at nothing to infiltrate American supply chains and gain insight into our most critical military operations and homeland security practices. Over the past few years, we have witnessed President Xi increased aggression within America's borders, buying up farmland, spying on us with high-altitude surveillance balloons, operating illegal Chinese police stations, and stealing valuable intellectual property. The threat posed by the CCP extends far beyond the confines of any single industry or entity, with an ultimate goal of entwining themselves into every aspect of our economy, society, and governance, a threat I'm seeing firsthand in my district. Our nation's greatest adversary is currently setting up shop in Johnson County, Kansas, under the guise of Nanotechnology USA, a Chinese-backed manufacturer firm with alarming ties to CCP military and intelligence services. This new manufacturing facility is just 34 miles away from Fort Leavenworth, 72 miles from Whiteman Air Force Base, 105 miles from Fort Riley, and 165 miles from McConnell Air Force Base. Allowing Nano USA to operate near these significant military installations and become embedded in our local supply chains opens the door to Chinese espionage and puts our military intelligence, trade, research, and intellectual property at risk of falling into the hands of the CCP leaders.
Representative Rashida Tlaib expressed her concerns about the encroachment of campaign rhetoric into legislative proceedings. She stressed the importance of maintaining the integrity and focus of the chamber on policymaking rather than political campaigning. Tlaib called for a clear separation between campaign activities and legislative duties, arguing that the infusion of campaign strategies and propaganda into the chamber undermines the legislative process and distracts from addressing the real needs of the American people.
I'm really sick and tired of us not leaving the campaigning at the Capitol steps. This is just another committee hearing where we're bringing campaign activity into this chamber and not being honest with the American people. This is not what our residents sent us to Washington to work on. I really do got a better idea, and I know Chairman Comer has my ideas. I've sent it to him all the time, but I really want to talk about what makes the lives of our residents difficult every single day, like greedy corporations raising prices to pay their executives and shareholders, polluters that literally treat communities in my district like poisoning them as the cost of doing business, politicians that put their own interests before the residents, many of which in this committee that own stocks in war weapon manufacturing. So when we do have to vote yes, or my colleagues have to get up on the floor and vote for more bombs and weapons in other countries, they actually make money, personal money. Their stock values go up. Look it up. People like our disgraced, twice impeached president, who represents the worst of the unchecked American capitalism, who, as we speak, is sitting in a courtroom as the first ever American president to face criminal prosecution.
Representative Jared Moskowitz made pointed remarks directed at James Comer, stating that he's in denial about the true sources of misinformation and political manipulation. Moskowitz suggested that Comer seek therapy to address his tendency to blame others and to stop feeling hopeless, especially given the influence of Russian disinformation campaigns. He argued that Comer's reluctance to acknowledge this manipulation is detrimental to national security and undermines efforts to address foreign interference. Moskowitz's comments highlighted the need for personal accountability and a more honest approach to combating the influence of external adversaries.
Let me start by saying that obviously Chairman Comer's not here, but I think in light of what we witnessed earlier, I think it's important that together as a committee that we begin Chairman Comer's therapy session, right? A member of the other side wanted to confirm what the title of the hearing was, right? That Chinese propaganda. Well, we know the title of the hearing certainly isn't about impeachment anymore. And Chairman Comer has suffered tremendous loss. And we all know in our life what it's like to suffer tremendous loss. There's all sorts of different stages of grief, and that's the loss, obviously, of his impeachment hearing. And everyone deals with that different ways, and sometimes it takes time to grieve and struggle and fill that hole, that void that now exists now that he no longer has impeachment. But the only way we as a committee are going to help Chairman Comer get better is we have to get to the root cause, right? So for today's therapy session, okay, I want to talk about denial, right? The denial that the impeachment hearings are over. And the denial, obviously, that he started with the 1023 form, which was Russian disinformation. And so, Chairman Comer, psychology teaches us that, someone might be, like him, using denial as a defense mechanism. And signs include that you refuse to talk about the problem, you find ways to justify your behavior, you blame other people or outside forces for causing the problem, you persist in your behavior despite the consequences, you promise to address the problem maybe in the future, or you avoid thinking about the problem. And so in addition to these signs that Chairman Comer has been displaying, as we saw in the beginning, he also might be feeling hopeless or helpless. I just want the chairman to know that we're pulling for him. We really are. I know it's been hard to become someone who was used by the Russians, but the good news is that he set this hearing today on Chinese propaganda because we've already lost him to Russian propaganda. I mean, we got to build a force field around the chairman to make sure we don't lose him to Chinese propaganda as well. And in fact, you can see behind me, these are quotes from the chairman, Chairman Comer, every single solitary time, and there are hundreds more, that he went on TV in interviews and talked about this 1023 form, which was all Russian disinformation. But we got to make the chairman understand that it's going to be okay. We will get him through this, but he's got to recognize that denial is not just a river in Egypt. He is going to have to face the fact that he was taken by the Russians. Now, I want to address something else that went on in this committee by another member. And I say this as someone whose grandparents escaped the Holocaust. So my grandmother was part of the Kindertransport out of Germany. Her parents were killed in Auschwitz. My grandfather, her husband, escaped Poland from the pogroms. The idea that we pretend that behavior is acceptable and regular. There are no concentration camps in Ukraine. They're not taking babies and shooting them in the air because they're Jewish. There's no gas chambers. There's no ovens. They're not railing people in. They're not ripping gold out of people's mouth. They're not taking stuff out of their home. They're not trying to erase a people. They're Ukrainians. Stop bringing up Nazis and Hitler. The only people who know about Nazis and Hitler are the 10 million people and their families who lost their loved ones, generations of people who were wiped out. It is enough of this disgusting behavior using Nazis as propaganda. You want to talk about Nazis? Get yourself over to the Holocaust Museum. You go see what Nazis did. It's despicable that we use that and we allow it and we sit here like somehow it's regular. Oh, Mr. Chairman, I welcome you back. I'm sorry we were trying to talk together and get you through the hearing, but I look forward potentially to talking to you at a future session. So thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes myself for questions. Mr. Mattis, you mentioned in your testimony that there was a shortage of expertise in the federal government with respect to China. Would you say that our government is ill-prepared for what China currently has with respect to their schemes against our government and our way of life? Does the government have a plan?
I would put it this way, that we are unprepared. We don't have enough China expertise to execute our own policy. So we're using, for example, we were asking a department to enforce a major piece of trade legislation, and yet for a couple of years they were relying on Google Translate for their language resources.
And explain why that's important, that we do have a plan. And that's the purpose of this hearing, and I apologize that there are, clowns like the last questioner that get off topic, but explain why that's important to have a plan.
Well, in some form or another, nearly every federal department has some role to play, whether it's because they fund research and therefore they have a responsibility to maintain the integrity of that research. They have a responsibility in some form to protecting constitutional rights and the exercise of those, which the CCP is attempting to restrict inside the United States. So you can kind of go down through each one and see that.
Exactly.
Since Chairman James Comer cut Representative Jamie Raskin off earlier, Raskin took a few moments before the meeting ended to reclaim his time. Here's what he had to say.
And I just want to show you what happens when our leaders cave in to China and to Russia. So here are some of the tweets that were sent out by the last president about President Xi in China. Smart, brilliant, everything perfect. We love each other. Friend of mine, a very, very good man. There's nobody like that. The look, the brain, the whole thing. My feeling toward you is an incredibly warm one, a brilliant man. If you went all over Hollywood to look for somebody to play the role of President Xi, you couldn't find it. There's nobody like that. The look, the brain, the whole thing. And here's the ex-president on Putin. His invasion of Ukraine is genius and pretty savvy. Putin was smart. The man has very strong control over a country, a tough cookie with great charm. So we need some democratic self-respect in order to combat the propaganda. And I am also happy that we saw today a few members actually demonstrate what propaganda running through American politicians looks like. Thank you for calling this very significant and important hearing, Mr. Chairman. I yield back to you.